Well, tonight's class is about pandemic, and really you don't want to fall prey to a pandemic. It's something that has happened in the past, and they will happen again. And people who are prepared to deal with it and understand what's going on don't necessarily have to be a victim. And that's what this is really all about, is avoiding being a victim. Self-reliance is one of the things we talk about all the time, and either we're going to be making provisions for the future, or by default we've chosen to be a victim, so let's just choose which one we want to do. And since you're here, I assume that you've chosen that you'd like to avoid being a victim, and it's about gathering information, understanding, and then practicing those things. Everything that we talk about in the area of provident living is really all about personal and family wellness, but some of them fit more closely right in this area as we think about health. Provident living, of course, has to be based on principles, I believe. And really, it's the principles that are the key to the self-reliance that make it possible for us to not find ourselves caught unawares and unprepared. When I talk about principles, and we'll just briefly mention these first three, but there's quite a number of them, and you can learn about them in other places. One of them is online, and the archives of the videos of these webcasts. There's Foundation Class 1001. It's available free online from Safe Harbor Alliance, along with many others that are there now and will be coming in the future. You go to either webcast or into the library. Since the website is dynamic and changing, it'll be fairly intuitive where you may be able to find these things, but you are looking for the Foundation Class 1001. Another place to get information is from a 2-hour principle-based DVD, which is called The Foundation. And we sell it inexpensively because we want people to get pointed in the right direction. Some of these key principles, very briefly, the one about the law of stewardship, which is why I'm here and why I believe you're here. It's about stewardship. You have the authority to act. You are granted that. You have the responsibility to act, and that's where we live our lives each day, is by the decisions we made. And we'll be held accountable. We'll get the just rewards of the things we do or do not do. That's the law of stewardship. It's a very simple one, but very, very powerful to understand. We also have the law of parachute. I think we understand what a parachute is. You have to have it before you need it, and have it with you when you need it, and how to use it, actually use it. It must be of life-saving quality. But in the case of provident living and being prepared to deal with things, now we're talking about attitudes, knowledge, skills, and the supplies, the material things you've set aside. Because, you see, the disaster has no responsibility for your well-being. That is your responsibility. The disaster simply does not care. So once again, like the parachute and like stewardship, they go together very closely. We talk all the time about these 9 core preparedness modules or core areas. And each one of them literally is like a parachute, because you can't cross any one of them off the list. We need all of them. Foundation is really about the principles, both the basic principles we talked about and a bunch more that are these basic fundamental ones, or in each one of these other 8 areas, it also has its own set of principles about how and why things work: clothing, water, sanitation, nutrition, shelter, wellness, tools, and supplies. And of course, tonight we'll be talking about wellness. And then what I consider to be the most fundamental of all principles is the law of provident living. And it has an order of priority, which is spiritual, attitude, knowledge, and stuff. And it has to be in that order. The tendency in this area of, well, emergency preparedness, some people call it, is wanting to gather a bunch of stuff. But you have to have the other 3 in place first. So you have the right stuff, know how to use it, and have the attitude to go through whatever you need to go through. So spiritual, attitude, knowledge, and stuff is the foundational law of all. Well, wellness, and just as an overview a little bit, talking about wellness in general, kind of this big picture. There are 5 key factors to wellness. Factor number 1, it's all about stewardship, that law that we mentioned already. You have the authority, since you're alive. You have daily actions that you're going to take. That's your responsibility to do the things that will be of greatest benefit to you, your well-being. And then accountability will simply happen based on the things you do or do not do. Factor number 2 is you need to understand that there are 6 very distinct creatures that make us up. They're intertwined very closely together, but they are individually important, and they have to be nurtured, taken care of. But you have to balance all of them: physical, mental, emotional, intellectual, social, spiritual. Don't cross any one of those off the list because you need to take care of all of them. Factor number 3 is that true wellness will draw upon all 9 of these preparedness areas. And we're obviously talking about some of the principles and understanding how and why wellness works. That's what we're dealing with right here, but it's the supplies, the materials, the tools. You're going to need shelter at times. You need clothing, you need water, you need nutrition. All of these things as a part of your wellness. Factor number 4, now something that we haven't already talked about in some of these other principles, is this very simple concept. There's 3 phases to wellness. Number 1 phase is it's to remediate and restore to optimal health. This is really about prevention. This is getting ready. This is getting ready for life in general. We want to get ourselves in top condition and take the actions, the responsibility for those actions is ours, to get ourselves in top condition. Phase number 2 is maintain optimal health and wellness. You see, once you've been restored to the highest level that you can get, or hopefully you're staying there, how do I maintain it? How do I keep it no matter what's going on? When things break around me, things are going wrong, what would I do to maintain my optimal health? Understand how to do that. And then phase 3 is the interventive treatment, and this is where injury or sickness occurs. This would be kind of a recovery mode. It really puts us almost in a loop back to number 1, which is to remediate, restore, and what you want to be in a position of always doing is maintaining your optimal health and wellness. We'll talk about some of those things here. Factor number 5, the primary areas that relate to wellness, and in this case, pandemics that we're going to be talking about. Number 1 is principles and knowledge. This is about understanding how to prevent and how to respond. The other one is lifestyle and health. This is about avoiding and prevention. Once again, it's so much to do with our lifestyle, the kinds of things we do. There's protection and sanitation that we'll be talking about. Here again, it's about avoiding ending up being ill, being caught by the pandemic. And then we have the internal prophylaxis, and this is about how to avoid and prevent these things taking hold. And then the interventive treatment, again, how to remediate and recover. These 5 areas is what we will be looking at as we go forward in this pandemic area. Now, when we talk about wellness in general, there's a number of classes you can learn more about these principles I've been talking about. Wellness Class 7001, which is really the fact that wellness is far more than just not being sick. 7001 is on the website. You can watch that when it's in the archives. Wellness Class 7101. True well-being comes from inside the person. It's not from outside. Very often we think we're going to be well because of the things outside and around us, and certainly they affect us. But what's inside of us has an even greater effect. All right, pandemic. The principles and knowledge that I mentioned in these areas. Prevent and respond to something when it's happened. So the first thing is, when we talk about pandemic, let's understand a little bit about this. And when people say pandemic, sometimes, pandemic and panic, they both begin with P. Now, pandemic. You have action choices, and these are very simply, number 1, you can be proactive or you can become a victim. When we talk about pandemic, you have the emotional extremes, which is either panicked or apathetic. Apathetic because some people simply say, oh, that happens in third world countries, and we see those things kind of go around the world, but we never have, hundreds of thousands of people die here. That happens wherever it is over there. So people become apathetic and just assume that our healthcare system will take care of us. First off, what is a pandemic? Pandemic is a serious epidemic that spreads worldwide, infecting a large portion of the human population. Please notice that it doesn't say anything in there really about death rate. It's just some kind of a bug, a critter, virus or bacteria. Very often it's a virus. That's the most common one, that spreads very widely throughout the world, affecting a large percentage of the population. It's not just regional, but it becomes global. Understand this about pandemics. Over the last 300 years, where we have pretty good records, there has been an average of 3 pandemics every century. 3 pandemics a century. And 1 in every 3 of these pandemics is really deadly. Most of them are not very deadly in comparison. We'll look at some history here in a moment. So pandemic it's not a matter of if we're going to have one. It's just a matter of when it will be and how severe it will be. It's not a question about them occurring and occurring throughout the world and affecting us. It's just how bad will they be. Well, here's a little history to put this in perspective. These are pandemics. 1889 to 90, H2N2, called the Russian flu. About 1 million deaths. 1957-58, I remember this one. Another H2N2, it was called the Asian flu. About 1.5 million people died. 1968-69, an H3N2, the Hong Kong flu. Remember that one? Now we have the big one that is out of most people's conscious memory, 1918 to 1920. This was an H1N1 called the Spanish flu. There were somewhere between 50 million people of record, and some estimates run over 100 million people globally die. Now let's bring us to the present. We had in 2008 and 9 another H1N1 swine flu, and the death rate, it was a concern because it's a pandemic and it's of the H1N1 variety, which can be very deadly. There was a lot of interest on that, even almost panic about that, but the death rate was very, very small, about 150,000 people. Now, 150,000 people is still a lot of people, and to those people and their families and their friends, that was very serious. But when you put it in perspective, there was a pandemic that we had that was not very virulent, not very many people died. Okay, normal influenza outbreaks will predominantly, we have this every year, we see it go on usually in the fall and winter is when they come on, and these influenza outbreaks predominantly are going to affect, hurt, and kill most of the people that die from the normal seasonal flu, juveniles and very young people. We have the elderly, and then we have other individuals that are weakened because of other kinds of stress or illnesses that they're dealing with, and you just add one more thing to what the body is trying to handle. It can't handle it, and so they succumb to it. So that's the way it is normally. Now, the 1918 Spanish flu, this was an H1N1. It predominantly killed, this is different than what we just talked about, young, healthy adults. 99% of the people that died were under 65 years of age. 50% of them were between 20 and 40 years of old, and that's different. What's going on about that one? And this is one you need to pay attention to and understand what the problem is so that you can recognize it. 1918 Spanish flu. It killed by what we call cytokine storms. And this is where the immune system, this wonderful thing inside of us that has all of these functions that will protect us from being attacked from the outside, that literally the immune system turns on the body and it's attacking tissues of the body. And the thing that you have to understand is that if you have a very strong immune system, which is, we're talking about young people and healthy, and so many of the people that died in the 1918 Spanish flu, we had soldiers. They were in top physical condition. They were exercising, and they were young, and they were strong. And these people were dying, and some of them were dying. When you read the accounts of that, the doctors were just absolutely, they were stunned by what was going on, because an individual could become symptomatic, and within 4 hours he was dead, primarily from the lungs filling up with fluid, and they just literally suffocated. They had drowned with what was going on, and that's because these cytokines, this body's immune system was attacking some of the tissues in the body, some of the mucous membranes, and particularly in the lungs, and literally these people died by suffocation, by drowning. It also attacked other parts of the body and caused fluid loss and bleeding and things internally, and they died very, very quickly. And that was because of the very strong immune systems, and this caused a stronger overreaction to the body. So when we take a look at the 1918 Spanish flu, it was listed as the greatest medical holocaust in history. 5% of those infected died. 1% of the human population died. Over 25% of the world suffered from it. It was a very, very major by our normal flu standards. The 1918 Spanish flu, the mortality rate, which was this greatest medical holocaust, where you had 50 to 100 million deaths worldwide. In India, there were 17 million. That was 5% of the population. In the United States, 675,000 people died. In France, 400,000 people died. There were entire villages in Alaska and Africa that they were just wiped out. Nobody survived them. So when we take a look at what caused this, here again, it was the edema, the fluids filling up the lungs, massive internal hemorrhaging, and then secondary bacterial pneumonia. If the edema and the hemorrhaging didn't get them, then there was other bacteria that was around. The body's now weakened, and so you had one of these other things, the staph or the strep or what have you, moved in and finished them off because the immune system could only handle so much. But here's something that's interesting. When you take a look at areas that were least affected by the H1N1 Spanish flu, and this is important because we learn from this. You look at where it goes the worst, you look at where it goes the best, you ask the question, what was going on? In Japan, the mortality rate was 0.425%, 257,000 people. America, Samoa, no deaths. New Caledonia, no deaths. So when we take a look at that, we're saying, why? Why did this occur? We had something that was very virulent, and some of these populations, they were young, healthy populations, and yet they were surviving. Why was this the case? Well, it was through very strict and very effective quarantine of individuals and the entire country. Literally, they shut down the ports. They wouldn't let anybody in once they saw what was going on, and then if anybody was sick, you were quarantined. You went into your house, wherever you were, into a building, into a medical facility, whatever, and you stayed there. You did not come out, and nobody was going in to visit you. You see, that was the secret. It was quarantine, very strict and very complete. The next pandemic candidates, and we already had one of these, the H1N1, the mortality rate, and this is falls into kind of the normal flu area. The normal flu rates run very, very low. Well, in the case of the Spanish flu, which was an H1N1, you had a 5% mortality rate, very, very high. When we take a look at this last pandemic, the swine flu, it was 0.03%. It was less than the type A, the standard influenza that we have. And that's the one that goes around each year normally. The type A influenza is the most common one. It has a very low mortality rate. And the Spanish flu hit at the very top end of that. This last pandemic of the swine flu was below that. So it wasn't something to, well, and of course, there was a lot of interest in it, and there was a lot of work being done to keep it from becoming bad if it should have been virulent. We're just blessed that it was not. Now, the next pandemic candidates, they include H1N1, which is a very common one. This is a subtype A, and it has a mortality rate of 0.5% to 5%. The H9N2, another one of these subtype A, it's highly pathogenic. The H7N2, which is even more pathogenic, and then we have the H5N1, which is in this bird flu category, and it is extremely high mortality rate. And the thing that's interesting about this is that the mortality rate of the bird flu that's been around for a while, this avian flu, has been very high. It's novel to the human population. It's extremely virulent. It is running right now, those people that get it, a 50% mortality. It is potentially very contagious, but fortunately, it is not being spread from human to human. And this is one of the concerns. We've heard about it. It's been talked about. And the public health officials and people that are aware and first responders who have been trained in this know that if that thing gets loose and if it becomes capable of spreading human to human, and in the process it keeps the same level of mortality, it will be extremely bad. You see, right now, the people that contract it, they get it from birds directly, not from human to human, but it's from the handling of chickens, ducks, geese, and there's a lot of the ducks, geese, and chickens that are handled particularly in the China and that Pacific area. And so there's a lot of birds being grown. They're also being grown in very tight quarters and where there's a potential to spread disease. And some of these handlers have contracted it, and half of them die. And that's with all of the medical help that they can be given right now. That's an extremely high mortality rate with all of the medical support that you have, the isolation, and the life-saving intervention that can be done. And the concern is that if we have that thing get loose, and now then the hospitals are overloaded, they're filled up with patients within just hours, that the mortality rate will be very high because you don't have these life-saving interventive things. So you have to be prepared to take care of yourself. This is not about gloom and doom and panic or what have you. It's just about these are the facts. This is the way that it is. 50% mortality, and if it remains at that high a level and gets loose and we have our hospitals filled, you're on your own is what it comes down to. In fact, you don't want to go to the hospital. All right. Now, your reactions are either going to be panic or apathetic when we talk about these things. You're going to look at this thing and say, oh, my heck, light your hair on fire and run around screaming, or you're going to say, nah, it just hasn't happened yet, probably won't happen, not worry about it. Perhaps what you really want to do is be proactive now, and so you don't become a victim. In other words, the first part of it's about being educated. The other part of it's about watching out for these things and knowing when to duck and hide, quite literally. That's what it comes down to. Now, the things to be concerned about is that during a severe pandemic, that systems will break down. And when we're talking about systems in particular, for us in the developed world like we are, it's the loss of infrastructure and to support the water, sewer, electricity, all the medical services and waste collection, these things that would normally go on. Because the problem is, if everybody is sheltering in place and somebody is not there to keep oiling the bearings, flip the switch, you know, change the valve a little bit to repair something that broke or isn't operating properly, then if they're not there, things start to break down. And what you have is you have infrastructure failure that's caused by these little cascading problems. They're not big, they're tiny little things that multiply one on top of another. The power goes down, the pumps go off that pump the water, the pumps go off that pump the sewage, communication goes down. They're all interrelated. If communication goes down, the power isn't being controlled properly, and the water systems and in some of these areas are not controlled. So they're interrelated. That becomes a problem. So are you prepared to do without these services? That's one of the things you have to consider. And sanitation is one of these huge areas to take a look at and be concerned about, because where sanitation is poor, death and disease runs rampant, and it will just make things even worse. Remember, in the 1918 Spanish flu, you had people that were not necessarily dying directly from the flu, but then other bacteria that was in the environment, you know, polished them off. Now, it's this secondary infections that cause a real problem that would be concerned about. That's one of the things you can control. And we have these vectors. Vectors are things that move it around, that spread it. We have people and air and clothing and water and food and surfaces. And then there's a few others that come into play. The biggest one, when we're talking about influenza, is people coming in contact with people and services where they're touching doorknobs and plates and spoons and tables, and into the air where they may be sneezing and coughing and things like that. That's the big spreader. It's primarily spread through contact with surfaces and from breathing these small droplets that are in the air or dust particles that are carrying this virus, and then secondarily through these others. So the goal is to slow down the spread of the influenza virus and allow the, if you will, the general population, the overall population, to adapt, because it does burn itself out. But if it spreads very quickly before people can get a handle on it, and both from the interventive side of it, but just from our immune systems, and a lot of people die. And it's the secondary infections in particular that we're also worried about, and that is pneumonia being a big one. And then you have the other things, the dysentery and the typhoid, strep, staph, cholera, all these kinds of things that can be a problem. So your reaction response, which should be, you can either be reactive and be panicked and apathetic, or you can be responsive, and that comes back to being proactive, getting educated now, understanding what can happen, watch out for things, and be prepared to properly respond so that you don't become a victim. Now, in Foundation Class 1105, Foundation Library that you need to own, we talk about some of these things, which is really about attitude and being prepared to deal with it. Also in Class 1120, which is if you're in an area and you see something rolling your direction, maybe you need to move to a less populated area. You know, populations where people are all jammed together is where you spread the disease. You see, if it's spreading through a population and you don't get close to anybody, in other words, you evacuate, then you're not going to catch it because it's spread from person to person. Plan of action. This was one of the other things we have to take a look at. How to avoid and prevent. these things. Remember these 5 areas that we're talking about. This falls into this knowledge and prevention area. Pandemic lifestyle, health is such a critical thing we're looking at, how to avoid and prevent these things. Well, the best strategy for wellness is one to prevent. You see, it's much harder to fix something once it's broken than just don't break it, don't wear it out to begin with. That's what we're talking about. In this case, how do you avoid becoming ill? How do you stay out of the way? Well, this only works if you are properly and completely prepared to deal with it. And a part of that is the education we're talking about. Recognizing that it is very serious, that it's coming, not being apathetic and say, well, I'll wait and see, and you decide early on. In other words, you want to be ahead of the rush, so to speak. If it's going to require evacuation, don't be in the middle of the crowd. You want to get out ahead of time. If it's going to require you to not be around people and simply shelter in, then you do that early on. So you've got to be informed and be watching what's going on. Avoidance is such an important thing, and it's really important that you learn some of the things about how to help your body be strong and healthy so that it's not weakened. Remember, we talked about that early on, that a part of it is about remediation, repair, optimal health. There's some sources that you may want to go to. One of them is there's a DVD that you can get from foodmatters.tv. Food Matters is a DVD. I think it's well worth watching. For some people, it's going to be, yes, I understand that. For other people, it'll be like, really? It's that important to pay attention to these things? There's other options here. The Culprit and the Cure is a book by Stephen Aldrin, and it's well worth reading also. The Maker's Diet, talking about food and diet. And you want to associate with people who have recovered their health. Here we are talking about how do you build your optimum health. And if you say, well, I have all these problems that's going on, guess what? They may really be fixable if you'll take a look. If things are not working the way you want them to work right now, maybe you need to do something different. Consider that. Your first line of defense is to balance and strengthen your whole body and the immune system, and you do that now. And what we're really talking about, of course, is lifestyle. It's mostly about diet, nutrition, and supplementation, and learning about these things now and making some changes. It's about stopping doing some of the things perhaps you're doing that are not as strengthening as they could be and doing some other things. That brings us back to something I already mentioned, this one DVD, Food Matters. I highly recommend you get that and watch that, show it to your old family and friends. The Maker's Diet, you can study things there, and then learning to do some things differently. This is one of my favorite books about culturing foods and the great benefits, if you will, of culturing. We're talking about culturing. Well, that happens to be yogurt, yes, but you can also culture grains and natural yeasts. We think of vegetable sauerkraut. Oh, there's so many more things you can do than just sauerkraut. By the way, it doesn't all have to be sour. Learn some things there because they're extremely healthy. They're very good for you, and things you can do yourself. You can do it now. You can do it in the future. It's also a way of preserving food. Other things to learn and study about is about diet. You know, acid and alkaline, the kinds of food you eat will make a difference. Fasting is a wonderful thing to consider doing, and fasting regularly for health reasons. There's a lot of reasons to fast, but one of them is it gives your body a chance to rest and actually rejuvenate and repair if you do it properly. One of our favorite books when you're trying to look up things that would help you if you're dealing with an issue, Prescription for Nutritional Healing, and working with foods and supplements and nutrients and things like that. Then other supplements that you may choose to use, things that we do and do regularly. It is about maintenance and how you would maintain yourself daily by things that you might consume, sprouts and wheatgrass and different vitamins and herbs and things. Learn about them, find things that work for you, and you do that through education, through testing, through trial. Be wise, be careful, and always be looking, can I do better than I'm doing now? And a big part of this is avoiding, in the nutrition class, I talk about the deadly foods, and there's so much of this stuff around us. Some of them are easy to recognize. They're artificially colored and sweetened and flavored in their process, that there's nothing left in them that was, you know, alive at all, even at one time. It's not sure that it was ever alive. These things are very hard on the body. You might want to consider eliminating them and moving into the more natural area. Learn about these things, Nutrition Class 5101 and 5103. talking about using food and nutrition and other kinds of things that you can build your health with now, but also how you're going to maintain it should the systems around you be down. Pandemic, this protection, and sanitation is a big part of it. Here again, it's about avoiding and preventing contracting the whatever this critter is that's going around. Your second line of defense, and this is to reduce and or eliminate your exposure to the infection. And you have to be prepared to do that now. It isn't like now that I've fallen out of the plane and everybody else has been thrown out with me and we're plummeting the earth. It's like we got to figure out how to put on this parachute and use it. It's a little late to do that. You do these things now. So during a severe pandemic, minor injuries or sicknesses become really problematic because you have high stress. You have the system down. You don't have the health systems around you. You don't have the things being kept clean. You have an environment that's highly contaminated. So minor issues become deadly, and that's why you want to keep yourself in top shape, but also learn how to keep from contracting some of these secondary things. And the responsibility to do this really is yours. Remember the law of stewardship? You know, you have the authority because you're alive. You have the responsibility to take care of things. You'll be held accountable for what you do or don't do, because it will be up to you. If you're dependent, if you say, look, I'm dependent on the hospital, I'm dependent on 911, you know, they're going to show up with the ambulance to take me when I've got a fever of 105, you know, and I'm drowning with edema in my lungs. I'll just call 911, you know, and they come. They may be overloaded. They may be sick too. When you're dependent on others, you've set yourself up more likely to be a victim. And your actions now will determine the outcome, becoming prepared now and educated now. So you do preemptive things. Here's some of the preemptive things that you need to be aware of. Number one is when things are going on, you listen, you observe, you be aware. And now you have to be careful about this one because there's so much junk that floats around. You know, there'll be things floating around on the internet, and you get all these emails that say, you know, we're all going to die tomorrow, and you'll get an email that says, oh, it's a bunch of baloney again. The sky is falling once more, Chicken Little. So you're going to have to be very well educated, both read between the lines and do cross-checking. You don't just get one email and say, oh, this is it. You're going to be looking at all kinds of indicators that are going to be both close to you and far away. And you don't want to wait too long. This is the thing. This is why listening and observing and being aware and being educated, understanding what does it mean, know what your options are, because if you wait until it's too late, well, it's too late. Now you're a victim. So you prepare to respond before I'll say the masses catch on. And your response is so important. So let's go back and look at this again. How to minimize your exposure and some of the things we've been talking about. More and more application of some of these general principles. Minimize your exposure. Well, that means get credible information. Do we have something here that's really serious? Do we have young, strong, healthy people that are getting sick and very sick and dying? Or is it primarily the very young and the elderly? I mean, does it look standard or does it look unusual? Because the unusual ones, the ones that are not normal, that are floating around out there and that may be triggering these cytokine storms, this is a problem. So you need credible information, and it's better to be safe than sorry. And I know you're going around with a filter mask on your face, you're going to feel kind of silly. Tell you what, not getting sick, you won't feel silly then. So you may want to do preemptive things early on. You avoid crowds in confined spaces. You want to avoid sick people. This all makes a heck of a lot of sense. You use protective gear yourself. Again, it goes back to how do you get sick? Well, it's going to be through things that you may breathe. And so using the masks and the right kind of masks and the other protective gear on your hands. And you have to make the decision, do I stay? Do I evacuate? Do I quarantine? And here again, this is where listening is so critically important. And that you understand what the issue is, how severe it is, and be prepared. Be prepared to stay in quarantine if that's the best thing for you to do. You have to know that you can quarantine and all the services are going to be off. The tap isn't going to be running. The power is off. All of these things are shut down and not working, so are you prepared to deal with them? That's where you have to be. The Other thing you have to be prepared to do is if it looks ugly, and it's now in Los Angeles and it's kind of heading your way as you're watching what's occurring, and you're in a large population area, you know, Denver or Salt Lake or a place like that, you might say, you know what, it's time for me to move to the uncle's farm, which is out in the open area and there's not very many people around, and we're going to go evacuate there and we're going to hunker down there. Be prepared to do that, and you're the one that'll have to make that final decision. Remember this, the people who were less affected by the Spanish flu in 1918, Japan, American Samoa, New Caledonia, it was because of very strict and very effective quarantines of individuals and the entire country in those cases. We're talking about the country. So what does this mean? Well, you have to completely isolate yourself and your family. You shelter in. You have to choose the right place to shelter in. It becomes a very strict quarantine where there's an absolute separation between you and the outside world. No one in or no one out. We're talking 90 to 120 days. And here again, you like to have means of communicating, realizing that our normal communications may be breaking down. In other words, the internet may be down. The radio stations may be few and far between. Having short wave and that ability to listen in particular, so you can listen at great distances to what may be going on around the world, trying to get as much information as you can. But the decisions you make will be up to you. A class you can consider attending, we will be doing that one here on Wednesdays, as well as it'll be recorded elsewhere, this wellness class 7203, which is shelter in place and how to do that properly. Personal protection, here again, it's about minimizing your exposure and eliminating as much exposure as you can. This goes right along with what we've been talking about. When we talk about a mask that you want to breathe through, the little comfort mask for dust, like the one down at the bottom, that's not the one you want to get. The minimum level of protection, it will be an N95. It will be on the box. It will be stamped on the mask. If it's not on the box and not on the mask, then it's just a little piece of filter paper that might do something. And what an N95 means is that it will filter out 95% of particles that are 0.3 microns or larger. It'll take out 95% of them. Now, is that good enough? Well, it's not as good as you could get, but it's a place to start. That's why I say it's the absolute minimum. The little dust masks will not do the job for you. One thing to consider is getting some of them that have this little breather valve on them. This is really useful if you have glasses on and it's cool weather and you're going to be out in cooler air, because when you exhale behind the mask, if it doesn't have this little breather valve on it, it pushes it away from your face and it blows some of this warm, steamy air up on your glasses. They instantly fog. This one has this little flapper in there that opens up and it allows the exhaled air to blow out. But when you inhale, it's closed and it's sucking the air through the mask to filter it. Now then, you say, okay, the viruses are smaller than 0.3 micron. When you take a look at this and say, you know, the 0.3 micron viruses are much smaller than that. They can be 0.03 micron. How's this going to help? How it helps is that you don't have viruses that are free floating. There's very few of them that will free float. They're going to be on dust particles and pollen particles. They're going to be on when somebody sneezes or coughs. It puts all these tiny little particles into the air that actually stay there for a long period of time. Big droplets are going to fall to the ground, fall to surfaces. But these tiny little ones are going to stay in the air for several minutes afterwards. But those are large particles. They're going to be larger than a micron in size. They may be several microns in size. So the mask can pick them up and filter them out so you won't breathe them. However, you have a problem with that over a period of time. You can't wear these masks for extremely long periods of time. You have to change them often. One of the things you can consider getting is the Triacin antimicrobial masks. Now, these masks have iodine impregnated in them. The iodine kills all of these pathogens, kills the viruses and or bacteria. It'll block out the fine particulate, but if you have virus that's on that particulate or is on the dust, it's going to now kill it so that they're not going to pass through the mask later on. And the carbon that's in the mask also will absorb organic vapors. These masks are rated for 8 hours of protection in a highly contaminated area. So when we take a look at masks, you can consider using Some of the painter's masks, these can be very effective. You can get them in the P95, the N90. They'll usually be a P rating on them. P means that it will absorb organic things like vapors from paints and shellacs and things like that, so you don't get the smell that comes through them. But they'll also be filtering out the particulate, and they will be very good. Consider also you may want to protect your eyes, because if you splash something into your eyes, virus can enter through the eye. They can come through the nose, the mouth, through breaks in the skin, and so you have to be very careful in those areas. One of the things to consider about these masks is how often you need to change them. If you're talking about a plain vanilla N95 mask, they need to be changed every 30 to 60 minutes, and they're thrown away. You don't wear them all day. You use them for a few minutes to get through an area and then get rid of them, because the microbes are not killed as they're being trapped on that mask. And remember, they may be on dust particles, they may be on little bits of sputum that's in the air, these little fine droplets that people sneeze and cough out. And as you're breathing on that mask, and as those droplets may be drying out, those virus now will be on a smaller and smaller droplet size, or they may become, separated from it, and they'll work their way through the mask, and you'll end up breathing them. That's why the triacin mask that has the iodine in it can go for much longer, because the bacteria and the viruses that strike the mask and are trapped in it, they will be killed. That's why it's rated for 8 hours, even in a very highly contaminated area. Another thing to consider is about having gloves to protect your hands. But one of the most important reasons to have the little latex gloves or vinyl gloves or nitrile gloves, remember some people may be sensitive to latex, so you have to take that into account in your preparedness, is not so much that, a virus isn't going to necessarily come through your skin on your hand, but it's to remind you, do not touch your mouth, nose, or eyes. Because if you take and, clear the dust out of the corner of your eye up there with a finger that was contaminated because it just touched a doorknob that somebody sneezed on 15 minutes ago, and these viruses can stay active and alive, virulent, on a surface, in some cases for up to 3 hours. Now, they won't stay there forever, but they may be there for quite a few minutes, even a couple of hours. You come along, you grab that doorknob, open the door, and then you go, rub your face, touch the corner of your eye, and that virus gets in there. When you have a mask on, a glove on, you're not going to be touching your mouth, nose, or eye. So it's, as much of anything, it's a reminder, keep your hands away from your face, because that's how you're going to pick these guys up. Eyes, nose, mouth is how they get in primarily, and of course then breaks in the skin. So having even the light little gloves will be important to remind you of that. You can also have some heavy-duty gloves if you're dealing with some really gnarly, ugly things that you're trying to get rid of, dealing with at these times. Having some of the covering clothing you can put on, Tyvek suits, and or scrubs, things like that, something that you can put on temporarily and then strip off. Some of these things are disposable, and then some of them, like the scrubs, you'll take and carefully handle them, get them into hot, soapy, and or water that has a disinfectant in them, like a chlorine bleach would be an excellent thing to use. Another way of taking care of these is with an ozone generator. Now, it requires power. This is the weakness to it, because if you're in a very serious situation, the power may go off. But if you have a way of generating power through a generator, or even better, through a solar generating system, then you can consider running one of these. Just be sure you have enough reserve power to keep it going, because ozone does in fact kill bacteria and viruses. It does a nice area of doing that in a closed, confined area. We're talking about within rooms and within whole house, and it will not only sanitize the air, but it will also kill things that will be on the surface. Now, it won't kill something that's down inside of something, because the ozone has to literally come in contact with it. Things to consider about this is in a sick room, and the control of a sick room, and if you're in a quarantine situation, or if you have somebody in your house that you've needed to quarantine. In other words, they're in a room, and it would be a sick room. You could be running the ozone both inside of that room, also outside of the room, with another one that's killing these critters as they may be trying to escape. One of the other things it'll do, it'll knock down odor and reduce that. And there's more information about all these things I'm talking about here also In the sanitation class 4104, in the part 4 of that, I go over these things and some additional information there, because we're really talking about sanitation here. This is a sanitation issue, keeping things clean and keeping you from becoming sick with things that are around you. Now, there's one thing to consider with ozone. This is a safety consideration. Ozone will, in fact, can kill bacteria and viruses, but it also, too much of it over too long of a period of time, is hard on you, on the lung and your mucous membranes in the lungs in particular. That's where it will do some inflammation. So if you have an extremely strong smell of ozone that you're smelling, that really acrid kind of a smell, that's too strong for you to be breathing for a long period of time, unless you have a protective mask on, so it is now destroying the ozone. A carbon filtration system will take care of that. So if you were breathing through a mask that had a carbon filter in it, and you can't smell the ozone, it won't be getting into your lungs, then you could run it very, very strong in the room, and it absolutely will wipe out all kinds of things in there, kill them. And it's really good at taking care of odors also. Personal hygiene is one of these things you've got to pay attention to, both from the standpoint of the virus, but especially from a secondary bacterial infection you can pick up. So having wash water stored is important. Attend water classes and be sure that you're storing enough water. Understand that hands spread disease. Both they spread them from you to somebody else, but also they allow you to pick it up. And here again, touch your mouth, nose, and eyes, and now you've got it. Please understand that bar soap can spread disease. Bar soap does not kill bacteria. They grow on it, they live on it, and if it's been recent enough that somebody washed their hands and set them down, somebody else comes along and washes their hand, and particularly in a situation where you don't have copious amounts of water, you're now in a survival situation, you don't have all the water to flush them away. The main thing that the bar soap does, the surfactants in there loosen up the oils and dirt and grease so they can be flushed away. It doesn't kill the bacteria, it just washes them away, literally. So the liquid soaps would be the best thing to be using versus a bar soap, because you won't be contaminating the liquid in there. You're pumping, pouring, squeezing it, and the bacteria don't live as well in these liquid things because that's produced in a different way. Other things to consider is using the GSE. Is wonderful stuff. It's great for external and internal use to kill bacteria and things on surfaces. Keeping things sanitary will be very important. Hydrogen peroxide does a really good job of killing the bacteria and viruses on surfaces. It's actually kind of like ozone in that it has extra oxygen in it. Oxygen's great at killing things off. And it's also very basic. Hydrogen peroxide is a base, and then you have vinegar, which is an acid. And here's two kind of common things around. You don't use them right at the same time. You spray one on a surface, and then the bacteria that are susceptible to a base are killed, and then you come along and spray it down with a vinegar, an acid, and those that are susceptible to acid are killed, so it does a great job. Steramine is another product that I like to talk about. There's greater information on this in the sanitation class. I have more time there to spend on it than in this short overview in pandemic. It produces a quaternary ammonia solution that's great at killing all kinds of viruses and things. It's used for washing surfaces as well as washing dishes and utensils and things. You can, of course, use the liquid and dry chlorine bleaches, but please understand that the liquid bleach has a very short shelf life, about 6 months. By the time it's a year old, it's significantly weakened. The thing that will store the longest will be the dry chlorine. This is calcium hypochlorite. You get that. It's used for shock treatment in swimming pools, for your hot tubs and places like that. As long as you keep it dry and cool, it will store for decades. It does a good job of still being around, whereas liquid bleach goes weeks. So now you can make your chlorine bleaches to wash your scrubs and surfaces and things like that. Having paper and plastic to be able to contain contaminated things and throw them away, being sure that you have ways of washing and scrubbing, and once again, greater depth on these in the sanitation class. Being able to wash your clothes, mop and clean floors, all of those things are vitally important. So sanitation class 4104, it's a 4 DVD set, The Hidden Deadly Disaster. You get greater depth on these things in there about the sanitation side of this. Now then, pandemic. Internal prophylaxis. What's a prophylaxis? Well, it's something that intervenes to help prevent you from becoming sick, from catching something. This is your third line of defense, is to be able to intercept and kill the virus before it gets into full bloom. It may be inside of you. You may have been exposed, and you're starting to pick these things up. And so now, if you do some things early on before it really has a hold of you, you can take care of it. However, there's a very important thing in this you have to consider. Are we talking about a standard flu? Are we talking about a novel one? Let's go back to this principle I was talking about earlier on, understanding these things. Is it killing the young, weak, and old? Or is it taking out the strong and healthy, the teenagers and the 20-year-olds, the guys in the military, the Marines that are strong and healthy and what have you? These guys getting sick and dying quickly, because that'll tell you what's going on. It lets you know exactly what you're dealing with here. And see, your proper response is vital, because if you get this wrong, you make things worse. What we're talking about is the cytokine storms, and there's some things you don't want to do with them. Now, it's not about turning off your immune system. It's keeping your immune system calm, if you will, keeping it somewhat even-keeled, keeping it from going into hyperdrive. Things that help with that is EPA, the omega-3 in the fish oils, vitamin E. Be sure that it's a D-alpha, not DL-alpha. DL-alpha is synthetic, so D-alpha. Vitamin C, the flavonoids, and you don't want to be taking immune system stimulants like echinacea and mushroom extract. And there's some essential oils and other supplements and things that are designed to, turn the immune system on so it'll get stronger. That's not what you want to do if people are dying from the cytokine storms. And so here we're talking about other things that you can do about balancing your immune response to fight the virus. Vitamin D3. You may start out with a fairly high dose and then lower it down. Zinc, garlic, selenium, and again, the vitamin C. And you can start with vitamin C in very, very high doses for a short period of time and then lower it down. Be careful with vitamin D3, because vitamin D3 is, in fact, and will be toxic. It is not water soluble, it's fat soluble, and I know something about it. I can talk about in another class. You take extremely high doses of vitamin D, it will hurt you. And I'm still dealing with that. It was an accidental poisoning of vitamin D3. We were consuming 186,000 units a day. That will hurt you. That will, in fact, kill you. 20,000 units for a few days is okay, and then drop it back into the 5,000 unit range. I wouldn't go higher than around 20 myself based on what I've learned. So consider these things that you want to do, and not having those immune system stimulants that you want to add in. Learning about diet, getting yourself balanced, the daily things that you're doing all the time, not because you're getting sick, but these are things you do all the time so that your body is strong and healthy and balanced. And one of the things you can consider using is some of the colloidal silvers. Now, my preferred one of these is a solution IE colloidal silver. We have a lot of experience with it, have used very large quantities of it, does not build up in the body. You will not get azuria with it, and it does not hurt the friendly flora. Its process of being produced is unique, and so it will outperform others. And we'll talk about that in some other classes. I've already mentioned the nutribiotic. These are things you can be taking internally. We're talking about the silver is internal. The GSE, it can be used internally to help knock down food poisoning, bacterial kinds of things. It's really good at that. Thieves oil is another thing, and it may contain different blends of things like oregano, clove, rosemary, cinnamon, lemon, eucalyptus. These things are known to be internally killing bacteria and viruses. You have the anti-plague formula. You can look these up and learn how to make your own that have a good history, and then understanding some of the herbs and vitamins that you can and probably should be using now, and in particular have in the future as a prophylaxis. Once you start to become mildly symptomatic, you want to up the use of some of these things. And of course, if it's cytokine storms that are going on, do not add these stimulants. Okay, potable water may be very precious, so be sure that you have enough of that in storage now, and the ability to properly sanitize, clean dirty water that may be around you. So prevent the virus from taking hold. Some of the other things you're going to be doing is frequent hand washing. No hands to the face. Remember the gloves that remind you, no hands in your eyes, nose, and mouth. Gargle with warm salt water. Do that a normal of times. Clean your nostrils. And that's using, and some people will use washes in them. The colloidal silver plus, I like to use that as a nasal spray and a vertical sprayer, taking vitamin C and zinc. Drink warm liquids often. These are things that are very useful in a very general sense. Now then, pandemic interventive treatment if you get yourself sick with these things. And here I want to give you some hope that you really can do some quite spectacular things, but you need to learn about these things. I don't have time to go into them in depth here, and there's other people that can teach these in greater depth than I will. We have some of them that have taught classes. We'll teach more of them using essential oils, homeopathics, energy work, nutritionals, herbs, all of these things. Learn about them and gain experience with them now. And I want to tell you some of the experiences we've had that have been very, very good. Now, I'll show you an ugly picture here. And we know about this personally, so I can show this, as we've had some challenges with my wife with ulcerations that have occurred with her. And they can become quite ugly. This is actually well on the way of being healed. We had medical things, standard medical things that didn't work. In fact, they made it worse, everything that we did. We went from that to this, using nothing but natural products. So you can do some things that sometimes people say, we can't do it when it's very serious. Well, yes, you can. So I want to give you the hope that you can learn about these things. There's books, there's publications. Use wisdom, but gain experience now so that you know what it is that you want to have and what's working. And consider this, that if you have these supplies, you know how to use them, that when things are really going south, the emergency room is going to be packed with people and they're all sick. It's not going to work if you go there. We love the emergency people. We love the response that they give us. We're grateful for them and all that they do. And the hospital is a great place to be very often, but if you have a pandemic going on and it's a very virulent one, it will be instantly overloaded within a few hours, and going there isn't going to do you any good at all. And that's not anything negative about them. It's just, this is reality. You've got to be prepared to take care of yourself. These secondary bacterial infections, here again, it's all about, the system is down. How do you keep things cleaned up? You have to be prepared now. Learn all about sanitation issues. Having sanitizers and cleaners also prevent the spread of disease through vermin. The mice in particular can spread a lot of them. Some of them spread some viruses, by the way, but you have flies and critters like that. Taking care of your personal hygiene. Once again, the sanitation classes where you can learn great depth about those things. Your next defense. You must be able to care for sick family members without becoming sick yourself. You've got to learn the basic skills and have the tools and supplies on hand. And you need to have some training about how to do this, because in practice, because on the job training, if you make mistakes, it can be fatal for you. So learn about how to quarantine people, and you may need to build a little quarantine room and even a quarantine bed using sanitizers and cleaners, using the ozone. Plastic sheet duct tape are really, really useful to have around so you can quarantine, because if somebody in your household becomes sick, are you going to dump them on the back porch and say lots of luck? Probably not. How do you take care of them and keep from becoming sick yourself? So you learn about these things beforehand, and there will be a class we've done. It's actually been videotaped. We'll be releasing that about how to do those things, how to take care of yourself and take care of somebody else without becoming sick. You'll see that one coming out in the not too distant future. Another thing that's important to all of this is your spiritual stamina, and that's something you practice and work on now so that it's ready to kind of back you up. The spiritual and the mental, emotional, these things are so critical. So you work on these things now. Whatever means you want to use, the teachings and the great spiritual giants around you. And there's wonderful things you can learn about here. For me, it happens to be with things I learned within the scriptures and with some of these people that give great teachings and understand that, recognizing there's more to us than meets the eye. Nurture those things. Also having other things that are very great for a psychological lift. And that can be both spiritually through music and things. This is not the time for rap and Western, let me tell you that if I can give you my opinion. There are things that can be very soothing and help you stay mentally, emotionally calm when you have a lot of ugly things happening around you. When there are people that you know or people you don't know, but you see that there's a lot of death going on, you've got to maintain your focus, your commitment, and your stamina, spiritually, mental, emotional, and be able to bounce back. Otherwise, you're going to be sucked into all of the fear and the despair that's going on around you. You learn about these things. Wellness Class 7103, which is more than just the things we've been talking about supplementation and foods and herbs, medical supplies and tools and training that you need to have. 7104, that's where you'll see this thing about how to care for sick people without yourself becoming sick. Surviving against all odds is about keeping your attitude in place. That's being readied for release. Herbs and essential oils for grid bound living, and next week I'll have somebody on. We'll be talking on our Tuesday night program, our audio cast. We will be discussing essential oils and those things. There's so many things to learn from a wellness library, videotapes, DVDs, audios, books, and those things. We'll teach you some of the things that I like, and you're going to know some of them. You know things I don't know, and it will be important for you to add to the things that you already know. Be reaching out to learn more. Holistic first aid, our dear friend Dr. Jed Adamson, who teaches that, and more with herbs and supplements and essential oils to go along with the normal kinds of things, and then grid down first aid for long-term injury care. Pandemics happen. Be ready or be a victim. That's what this is about. That's this overview that I've given you about pandemic, and then dig into it in these other wellness areas. You see, I hope there's no doubt in your mind that pandemics do in fact happen, and your readiness is vital, and being prepared to properly respond is your responsibility, not somebody else's responsibility. There's people that will want to help you. The medical services will want to be there. There's wonderful professionals that will do everything they can do, but if they're completely overwhelmed, then it will be up to you. So will you live providently? Well, as always, we have the choice if we're going to be preparing ourselves and getting ready to face the future. And if we do by making provisions in all these areas, then we can face the future with hope, with confidence, not fear and trepidation. We've been talking in this wellness area, just one of the classes here, and you look at all the wellness classes that we provide and other people are providing others out there. You take a look at all the string of classes and all the learning opportunities, say, oh my heck, can I learn all this? Do I have to know all this? And the bottom line is you can't. Let's be very realistic about things. You're not going to know everything there is to know about herbs and vitamins and energy work and those things. You're going to be specialized in some areas you know very well. So what it's really all about is developing community. It's about finding people because of your outreach and cooperation, the community that you built. Last Tuesday night's audio that we did, which we'll have on the website within a few weeks, we were talking about building community. I've talked about those things before. You find people that fill in some of the flat spots in your knowledge, some of the places you just don't know. There's a bunch of things I don't know. That's why I draw people around me, because I can help them, they can help me. Don't try to do this all on your own. If you think it's you and your household against the world, you will be wrong. So it is about developing this outreach that you can do to draw people around you, and you become a part of their community and you a part of theirs. You see, it's about this. It's about becoming a self-reliant family, as self-reliant as you can possibly make it, but you're interdependent within a self-reliant community, because we need each other. Nobody for long periods of time is completely independent. You need outside tools and supplies and knowledge and understanding. If nothing else, just somebody else to be standing watch at night to be sure that something isn't going to overtake you in the night. You can't stay up 24/7. So we need each other. And this is not about gloom and doom. This is about reality. This is about being prepared so you don't have to be afraid and say, what am I going to do? Because this is the truth about life. There's no doubt that tomorrow will come, and there's no dispute that things happen. But you see, how you're prepared to meet tomorrow will make all the difference in the world. And if you're prepared, if you're properly, completely, totally prepared for the worst, pandemic in its worst form, then no matter what happens, it will be an adventure for you and those people that you're working with around you. So it comes down to this, that preparedness is understanding principles. It's not just about having a bunch of things that are tucked away in the basement trunk of the car and hanging up in the closet, because it's what you know that is more important than what you have. You need stuff, but you need to be sure you have the right things, you know how to use them, and you need to be sure that you have all your bases covered. So you learn about the principles in each and every one of these areas, and then you make preparedness a lifestyle. We really call it provident living. Test and try and play with and have fun and experiment and do things. And some of the things right now, if we're talking supplementation or herbs or what have you, need to know how they work now. And you may find things that work good for you and they don't work as well for you. Now's the time to find out about those things. And now's the time to be building that community around you. So you test, you try, you do weird things at home in the environment. You go camping in the cold, in the heat, those types of things. Turn off the water, turn off the electricity. Play with some of these things so that you have confidence about them. We will do our best here at Safe Harbor to provide information and training, and there's a lot of things that are coming that are in the works, and I'm editing like crazy right now. Things are going to go up, audio and video, and preparing new programs. You will see many things coming into our mission is to reach and teach about some of these key things. Do we know everything and have everything? The answer is no, but we will do our part. We do that every week. We have free classes. The internet audio, it's on each Tuesday night. You link to it through the newsletter and through the website that will have a link on it where you can go and listen to those things. Then you have the internet video cast that you're listening to right now. And then we happen to record those things, and I appreciate Connie who's doing that and makes it ready so that we can put it into our archives that will be available for you to review and send other people to. And you will see many of these coming. I've got about 30 of them I'm working on right now, getting prepared. There's a free newsletter that you can register for. That registration doesn't work on the new site quite yet right now. Very soon it will. If you need to get on right now, if you're somebody that's been invited, you can send it to info@safeharboralliance.com. Tell us you want to be added to the newsletter list. It takes a few days on that because we're getting all the automatic set up. But we will get you added to that list. So we will do our part each and every week to teach and train, and we'll have things on the website that you'll have access to now and in the future for training of yourself. But as you find other people who are interested in saying, oh, what's this thing about pandemic? Is it for real? You can send them to this class. It'll be there. And then to the more in-depth classes that will also be there so you can learn about things that we've been talking about. Well, this evening, I appreciate each one of you that come and each one of you that is participating in these things, because what that means is that not only is your household becoming prepared, but there's a good chance you're sharing with other people and you're helping them. See, it's about being prepared rather than panicked. It's about being proactive rather than apathetic and say, well, you know, that's what the system is here for. It's about taking responsibility. Obviously, you've done that by being here, and your work and efforts will help other people take responsibility also. Well, this is Jim Phillips wishing you the best of evenings and the best of a future that you can enjoy coming no matter what may happen. You prepare yourself to deal with it. So I will see you folks next week, all of you who can, and those who view online. We look at those views also, and for literally the hundreds of people that come afterwards. Have yourself a great evening, and I will be back with you next Tuesday and Wednesday. This is Jim Phillips of Safe Harbor Alliance. Have a great night. Goodbye.